Let's rewind the clock back to late 2007. The gaming landscape was in an absolutely bizarre state. You couldn't walk into a shop without tripping over a mountain of cheap white plastic. The Nintendo Wii was printing money at a terrifying rate, and every publisher on the planet was desperately scrambling to figure out how to strap a motion sensing television remote to your wrist. We were buying steering wheels that didn't even connect to anything, plastic tennis rackets that actively threatened to shatter our living room televisions. It was essentially just an overpriced piece of plastic housing that you slotted your Wii remote and nunchuck into, but for some reason, it felt like the absolute most important piece of hardware you could own. And Capcom, seeing millions of these things in living rooms across the globe, looked at their flagship survival horror franchise and made a deeply hilarious decision. For over a decade, we had been slowly creeping through dark mansions, agonisingly conserving ammunition, and meticulously managing floor-based inventory systems to unravel the massive global conspiracy of the Umbrella Corporation. We had barely survived the streets of Raccoon City, we had escaped the training facility, and the stage was perfectly set for the ultimate epic conclusion to the sprawling nightmare. So how did Capcom decide to finally pull the curtain back and show us the definitive, canonical fall of the biggest evil corporation in gaming history? They turned it into an on-rails arcade ride. Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles wasn't a sprawling, methodical horror masterpiece. It was a theme park attraction. It took everything we love about the slow, agonising dread of the early PlayStation games and strapped it to a rollercoaster car moving at top speed. You didn't have to worry about checking every blind corner or hoarding your shotgun shells, because the camera was physically dragging you by the nose through the greatest hits of the entire franchise. It was completely jarring and entirely abandoned the core, suffocating identity of the series. But the most frustrating part about the whole thing, it was actually an incredibly good time. Standing in your living room, holding a plastic submachine gun and aggressively shaking your television remote to reload while a hunter lunged at your face was absolute peak 2007 energy.
We would like to play.
Welcome back to the Resident Evil Retrospective. This is the series where we are playing through every single entry in the franchise in release order, documenting the rise, the falls, and the bizarre experimental diversions of Capcom's survival horror juggernaut. We've survived the mansions, the Raccoon City streets, and the high seas experiments, and now we've arrived at the Umbrella Chronicles. The biggest mental hurdle to get over when you first booted this up in 2007 was the sudden, complete loss of control. If you grew up playing the early entries, your brain was hardwired to approach every single room like a delicate, terrifying puzzle. You would pause at the door, check the ammo count, and meticulously decide if it was worth fighting the zombies in the hallway or just trying to bait a grab animation to sprint past. Here, the game makes every single one of those decisions for you. You are permanently locked onto a predetermined, invisible rollercoaster track. The camera swings wildly across corners and charges down narrow corridors, completely robbing you of the ability to retreat. If a pack of infected dogs burst through a window, you can't just turn around and tactical retreat back to the safety of a save room. You just have to plant your feet, grip the plastic zapper, and start squeezing the trigger. It was incredibly jarring at first. You were essentially trapped inside the body of a protagonist who had apparently downed a pot of coffee and decided the best way to survive a global biohazard was a brisk, unstoppable jog. You would casually pass by locked doors and shiny items, frantically mashing the grab button to snatch them out of the air before the camera aggressively yanked your head in the opposite direction. But once you accepted the reality that you were no longer playing a methodical survival horror game and you were instead playing a high-score arcade shooter, the genius of the format started to click. It stripped away your inventory management and the endless backtracking, distilling the franchise down to pure, unfiltered panic. Viewing these familiar, terrifying locations straight down the barrel of a gun gave the whole experience a frantic, desperate energy. You weren't a survivor slowly piecing together a mystery anymore. You were an action hero trying to shoot your way through a burning building before the timer hit zero.
They're coming! This way!
Got it! Welcome to the Umbrella Chronicles. Accessing file number 24981 149RC.
Biohazard. The outbreak occurred in the summer of 1998. It started in the American Midwestern town of Raccoon City and brought hell to Earth. The T-virus was developed as a biological weapon, proliferating amongst the unsuspecting public. It metamorphosed them into living death zombies. Umbrella's mission statement had always been preserving the health of the people, but beneath this bright statement lurked the shadow of Oswald E. Spencer's ambition.
End of filing concerning the outbreak incident in Raccoon City.
The truth behind the rise and fall of Umbrella is something to which only a select few are privy. The beginning of the end started on the outskirts of Raccoon City in the Arklay Mountains.
The transition to a rail shooter meant the quality of the experience lived or died by the feel of the cursor. In 2007, the Wii Remote was a revelation for this specific genre. Unlike the clunky analog stick aiming we'd suffered through in Dead Aim, the Wii's infrared sensor bar allowed for a level of snappiness that felt like bringing the arcade experience directly into your living room. You weren't fighting the controller anymore. You were painting the screen with lead. Capcom leaned into this by making the environment surprisingly reactive. Almost every wooden crate, glass bottle and hanging light fixture could be shattered, often revealing hidden files and much needed ammo. It turned every hallway into a frantic scavenger hunt where you were constantly scanning the periphery while trying to keep a horde of zombies at bay. Then there was the reload mechanic. To refresh your magazine, you had to physically shake the Wii Remote. In the quiet moments, it was a satisfying tactical quirk, but in the heat of a boss fight, when a hunter was mid-leap and your cursor was flashing red, that physical shake became a source of genuine high-speed panic. It added the layer of kinetic energy to the horror that the classic games never had. You weren't just pressing a button to survive, you were physically thrashing around your lounge, desperate to hear that click-clack sound of a fresh magazine before your screen faded to grey. Our first major stop on this nostalgic tour is a return to the setting of Resident Evil 0. Seeing the Ecliptic Express rendered with the Wii's updated assets was a massive treat for fans who had spent years squinting at the GameCube original. The tight, claustrophobic corridors of the luxury train are actually a perfect fit for a rail shooter. Because the environment is naturally linear, the invisible tracks of the game feel less like a restriction and more like a natural progression through the carriages. The atmosphere here is heavy and damp. You can practically feel the rain lashing against the windows as the camera drags you through the dining car and past the cramped passenger cabins. In this format, the leeches, the primary threat of Resident Evil 0, feel much more menacing. When they swarm the floor and walls, you realise just how little room you have to breathe. Because we're sticking to the early game atmosphere, the focus remains on that initial sense of dread. The game does a fantastic job of highlighting the sheer verticality of the train, often snapping your view upward to deal with threats dropping from the ceiling. It's a fast-paced, condensed version of Rebecca Chambers' Nightmare that strips away the frustration of the item-dropping mechanic and replaces it with pure, forward momentum action.
What is this hall? What was that?
I'll go check it out.
It's dangerous going alone. I'll come with you.
All right. I will stay and secure the area.
As much as Resident Evil 0 set the stage, the real main event for most players was the return to the Spencer Mansion. This is where the Umbrella Chronicles hits its peak of nostalgia stride. There is something deeply surreal about seeing the iconic main hall, with its sweeping double staircase and flickering candles, viewed through the first-person lens. In the original 1996 game and the 2002 remake, the magic was a place of silence and creeping shadows. Here, it's a shooting gallery. The game takes you through the most famous rooms, the dining room with the grandfather clock, the art gallery, and those infamous dog hallways. But at a pace that feels like a fever dream. You aren't checking the map to see which key fits where. You're just trying to keep your head as the camera pulls you towards the next encounter. The real joy of this selection is the rebirth feel. It's the same layout we've memorised over a dozen playthroughs, but the perspective shift changes the threat completely. When a Crimson Head wakes up and sprints towards you in first person, the panic is immediately visceral. You can't run away, you can't hide behind a camera angle. You just have to land those headshots before it closes the gap. It turns the most famous location in survival horror history into a high-stakes test of reflexes, proving that even a decade later, the Spencer Mansion still had plenty of ways to make our hearts race. From the isolated dread of the mountains, we are dropped directly into the urban chaos of Raccoon City. This section primarily pulls us from the events of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and the Outbreak series, giving us a high-definition look at the city's final hours. In the classic games, the streets felt like a maze of barricades and burning cars that you had to navigate with surgical precision. In the Umbrella Chronicles, the streets feel like a war zone. The scale of destruction is much more apparent here. You see the sheer volume of the undead pouring out of the alleyways and overturned buses. Because you are on rails, the game can script cinematic moments where the camera pans up to show you a helicopter spiraling out of control or a building collapsing in the distance. It captures the Outbreak feeling better than almost any other entry, precisely because it focuses on the spectacle of the collapse. Then of course there is the Nemesis. Facing the pursuer in an on-rails format is a completely different kind of stress. In the original games, you could at least try to run. Here, when he leaps down from the rooftop and sprints towards the camera, you are forced into a stand-up fight. It turns these encounters into rhythmic high-pressure shootouts, where one missed shot means a rocket launcher to the face. It's loud, it's messy, and it perfectly encapsulates the shift from survival horror to pure action cinema.
Thus, Raccoon City vanished from the map. However, not everything disappeared with the town's annihilation. The nightmare would continue over the next few years as the survivors fought on.
While you could tackle the downfall of Umbrella alone, the game was clearly designed with a second player in mind. Local co-op on the Wii was a staple of the era, and the Umbrella Chronicles is arguably one of the best reasons to own a second Zapper shell. Having a friend beside you on the couch, both of you frantically painting the screen with crosshairs, transforms the experience from a horror game into a high-octane bonding exercise. However, cooperation is a very loose term here. Because you share a single screen and a single health bar, your survival is tethered to someone else's competence. There is a constant, unspoken tension as both of you scramble to pick up the limited first aid sprays and ammunition drops scattered throughout the levels. If your partner is a screen hog who insists on shooting every destructible object while you're trying to thin out a pack of hunters, the frustration can boil over pretty quickly, but when it works, it's brilliant. There is a genuine sense of a tactical teamwork in splitting the screen, one player focusing on the zombies in the foreground, while the other picks off the snipers or the crows in the distance. It's a loud, frantic, and often hilarious way to experience the series. It completely strips away the lonely survivor trope that defined the franchise for years. replacing it with the kind of rowdy arcade room energy that made the Wii such a social phenomenon in the first place.
You okay?
I'm fine. That's some good shooting.
We've got to get out of here. A rescue chopper's on its way. Come with me.
While the shooting was the main draw, the real hook for the hardcore fans, the thing that kept us replaying levels until our wrists ached, was the lore. The Umbrella Chronicles is essentially the personal diary of Albert Wesker. Having him narrate the entire experience completely shifts the tone of the franchise. It's no longer a desperate struggle for survival, but a cold, arrogant recount of how he manipulated every major event from the shadows. To get the full picture, however, you had to work for it. Capcom implemented an addictive archive system that served as the game's primary retention mechanic. Every level was littered with hidden files, but the juiciest revelations were locked behind the ranking system. If you wanted to understand the missing links between the games, you needed to chase those exclusive S ranks. This turned the game into a high-stakes scavenger hunt. You weren't just playing to reach the end of the rail, you were playing to perfectly optimise your headshots ratio and destruction percentage just to unlock a single paragraph of text. These files provided the connective tissue the series had been missing for years, bridging the gaps between the mansion, the city, and the final fall of the corporation. It transformed an arcade shooter into an essential piece of the Resident Evil puzzle, making it impossible to ignore for anyone who cared about the overarching plot.
Soon, Umbrella will be gone forever. They held the power of the T-virus in their hands, but they lacked the proper vision. The true vision of the future. And now, it falls to me to usher in this new future.
After 13 years of shadowy conspiracies, failed containment protocols, and city-level sanitisation, the fall of the Umbrella Corporation didn't happen in a massive survival horror RPG. It happened right here, in a 2007 Wii shooter. The final assault on the Russian Caucasus facility serves as the definitive end of an era, seeing Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, the original duo from 1996, standing side by side to dismantle the heart of the company felt like a necessary cathartic closing of the loop. It officially moved the franchise out of the 90s and into a global, high-stakes future where the threat was no longer contained to a single mansion or a single city. But as the credits roll on the corporation, we know the bioweapons arms race is far from over. The collapse of Umbrella simply left a vacuum that something even more organised and much more sun-scorched was ready to fill. Next time, we're leaving the snowy Russian wastes of the dark corridors behind, and we're heading to the Kaijuju Autonomous Zone in Africa to witness the series' massive, controversial leap into full-blown action co-op. We're finally stepping into the light of Resident Evil 5. Before we depart for Africa, let's talk about the survival rate of this channel. Much like a high-stakes run through the Spencer Mansion, your support is the only thing that keeps the resources coming. Currently, about 90% of you are viewing this content from the shadows like a hidden Wesker report. You're watching, but you haven't hit that subscribe button yet. If you want to help keep this retrospective on the rails, landing a headshot on that like button and leaving a comment is the best way to ensure you don't hit a game over. If you're a true Resident Evil nut and want to see the full journey from the very beginning, I have a playlist containing all 14 entries covered so far. This series is built on the perspective of someone who has been obsessed with this franchise since the first opening of those heavy Spencer Mansion doors as a 6-year-old back in 1996. Go back and check those out if you want the full history. Until next time, keep your herb supply high and your crosshairs ready. Thanks for watching.
We struck a fatal blow.
The end of Umbrella is just a question of time. But
Yeah. He's still out there.